grain of rice, a grain of rice is going to tip the scale. Just remember that, lads.
There's a small bit of a needle there.
Come on, Mayo, you've got to get Andy Moran into the game.
Listen back to England, and now they're really roaring. And I can tell you, that there won't be a cow milk in County Clare for at least a week.
Hello everyone, you're very welcome to a very special edition of the Irish Examiner Gaelic Football Show. We are here in Pobalscoil Chorca Dhuibhne and we've been joined by a couple of hundred students from the school who will be asking questions later on. My name is Paul Rouse and I'm joined by the pre-Vidya Éamonn Fitzmaurice, who of course is an All-Ireland medal winner as a player and as a manager with Kerry, by another former Kerry footballer, Dara Ó Cinnéide, and by the former Cork footballer and manager Ronan McCarthy, who has travelled across today and has walked into the Lions Den, to use Jack O'Connor's phrase. We are going to talk about next weekend's Cork and Kerry game later, and we are going to ask whether Cork are indeed a disgrace, as they were called this week by one former Kerry footballer. But we have to start with two very different matches that were played last weekend. One involving Dublin, which we'll come to in a moment, but first up was in Omagh, where there was the complete dismantling of the All-Ireland champions, Tyrone. Éamonn, you were there. What did Derry do to Tyrone that caused them to unravel?
I think Derry were preparing for that game for a long time, Paul, and it was very evident that Rory Gallagher had a plan specifically designed to get at Tyrone, to play to their own strengths, to nullify Tyrone's strengths and to play to their own strengths. So I think Derry deserve a huge amount of credit for the way the game played out and getting the win. Tyrone were well under par. They haven't got that energy about them this year, that the energy that I suppose that hunger brings. All teams probably relish when they have a cause. I think Tyrone probably relish more than most when they have a cause. And the fact that they've got to the top, they seem to be missing that bit of an angle or that bit of a cut about themselves. So whether this defeat now, such a comprehensive defeat at home, the ill discipline, the 2 red cards, all of that will give them something additional going into the qualifiers. It possibly will, but they have a lot of work to do in the 4 or 5 weeks to get ready for the next game, and they possibly will need a favourable draw as well. If they draw the likes of a Mayo or an Armagh, or whoever ends up in the qualifiers after this weekend, it could be quite a sticky game for them.
On the commentary, Dara referenced a few times Rory Gallagher, the Derry manager, and how he was issuing instructions through the game. Will you talk us through that?
Yeah, he was very vocal. He always is. That's his style. He's last year, I think it was very evident in the game against Donegal and Ballybuffet, because there was no one at the game, or very few at the game, and you could hear every instruction being barked. That's one style of management that you are,
Is it your style?
No, it wouldn't be, no. I suppose that style of management, he's very involved in the game himself, and he shows how much he cares, and he's kind of playing every ball with the players, and he's getting them back into position, and he's reminding them about what they need to be doing constantly. And for me, that's effective for him. But I think that ultimately, when you get to the real big stuff, particularly if you're playing in front of 80,000 people in Croke Park, the players aren't going to be able to hear you anyway. So you need to be able to enable the players and empower the players to make the decisions and to be able to be constantly on top of each other, rather than the direction coming from the sideline the whole time. But look, that's always been Rory Gallagher's style. It works for him, worked very well the last day. I'd say he was driving the Tyrone fellas mad. He was driving the...
you got a bit of a nudge at half-time.
Got a good shunt at half-time from McKernan going off. So, in many ways they out Tyrone. Normally Tyrone are the masters of that, of frustrating you and taking you out of your comfort zone. But Derry definitely did it very well the last day, and a lot of that came from Rory Gallagher, and I do think he deserves huge credit. I mentioned it in the column on Monday that he has had a very defensive game plan, going back to years. Probably not enough of an offensive side, but certainly last Sunday they showed loads in the offensive side of the game as well, and to put up the score they did against Tyrone, to win as comprehensively as they did in Healy Park, it was a huge win for them. The trick now will be to try and back it up.
Do you see them backing it up?
I don't know. I think it'll be hard for them. Monaghan are a very experienced, seasoned team. They probably, were happy with the way they won the game on Saturday evening, but they won't have experienced the same highs of emotion possibly that the Derry lads would have, having won their first championship game in 7 years. So for Derry to get up to that pitch again in 2 weeks is going to be a challenge for them. I think that if they do beat Monaghan, they're a serious item and we'll all be really sitting up and taking notice, but I think they'll find it hard to beat Monaghan. But even if they don't beat Monaghan going into the qualifiers, I don't think anyone will want to see them coming.
Ronan, do you see any conceivable way that Tyrone can put their season back on the rails and win the All-Ireland?
I think they can. I don't know, are they any worse off than when they came out of Clarny last year, which was a real humbling experience for them. We played them before we played Limerick last year in the championship. We played them in Parnell Park in Dublin, and you wouldn't have said at that stage that that they were All-Ireland champions in the making. So I think the big advantage that they have is they have maybe 4 or 5 weeks now to regroup. And I think that's important. And they used the time last year after the game in Clarny. They used that very well to, I suppose, get themselves in the right direction again. So I certainly wouldn't write them off. I think that there are signs of poor signs in the team. A lot of petulance in their display, I thought, the last day. And, they've always played on the edge, and that can be a positive thing. But, when that goes too far, it impacts negatively on the team. But they'll be hurt, by not only the defeat by a neighbour, obviously, but the manner of the defeat, in their home venue. So they really, they used it last year to regroup. I think they can do it again. They have the time to do it again. The difference, now is, and Éamonn alluded to it there, is, the draw, it's a real, the draw you could get here, you could really, really difficult games. The chances of getting a game to get yourself back up and running, is far less likely. But I certainly wouldn't write them off at all at this early stage.
Dara, what happens after you win an All-Ireland?
It's a funny one, I suppose. I remember hearing Joe Brawley years ago talking about the one that he won in '93 with a very good Derry team who were, when I started playing football, Derry were the kings of football at that stage. I was 18 years of age. And Joe was talking about being inside in the shower, and after winning his All-Ireland, all the elation of the previous 10, 15, 20 minutes is gone. You're washing your hair and getting ready for a night out or whatever, and Joe said to himself, is this it? Is that it? Because I suppose the end of every game, it doesn't matter what the game is, it's an anticlimax if you're competitive. Every competitor likes the competition, likes the game, and almost the final whistle in any game, whether it's a final or a first round game, is an anticlimax because you're building yourself up and you're preparing for a game. So if you win in All-Ireland like Tyrone did last year, and the history of Tyrone football has shown that they were brilliant in 03, 05, 08, and very average in 04, 06, not so much 09, they were decent. And it's happening again up to now. Éamonn and Ronan spoke about, I suppose, hurt. Depends on how hurt they are. And you can manufacture that. They were obviously hurt after that game in Killarney last year. That was humiliating. And that's hurt that you carry with you for a while and that motivates you. But it'll be synthetic if they do manufacture it this year because, they've won their All-Ireland. They've got their kudos. I think it was telling, I suppose, the 6 or 7 players that left the panel, they were downplaying it, but there's a certain amount, cohort in any group that will say, listen, I've achieved everything I want to achieve now. Is this it? Is this really it? An All-Ireland medal? Is this what I've built my whole life up towards? That's why I think we should give unbelievable credit to the Dublin team the last number of years, that they keep coming back again and again and again. The Kilkenny hurling teams that were so consistent and persistent over the years. They were an amazing, amazing group of people. And that's what happens after you win an All-Ireland. It's only natural. I never played in a team that did 2 in a row. I think Éamonn might have. It's almost impossible. And that's why I would give so much credit to the Kilkennys, to the Dublins that did it again and again. And our own Kerry team back in the day, back in the 70s and 80s, the Kerry team did it in 06 and 07 as well, which at the time was like the Holy Grail. You couldn't be done. They were saying in the modern era. Kerry did it in 07, so they deserve huge credit for that. But I'm not writing off Tyrone no more than the two lads here. There's too much quality there, but it's just their history post All Ireland has not been good, and the little telltale signs, the petulance that Ronan spoke about, that's something you do not want in a squad, and that's something that's very hard to eradicate because that sense of hunger isn't as strong. It can't be, and that's what happens after you win an All Ireland.
Against that, Ronan, if you look at Dublin last Saturday evening against Wexford, albeit a Wexford team that finished third in Division 4, or third from bottom in Division 4, and had only beaten a poor Offaly team the previous Saturday night. Are Dublin back? And should the people in this room be very afraid?
Yeah, I think so. I think whether they played well, and they did play well against Wexford last weekend, they're going to have a big say in who wins the championship, whether they win it themselves or who they knock out on the way. But certainly based on the performance against Wexford, we said the previous year, they were night and day. They played, they played really well. Maybe the opening 10 minutes, probably did things that were very un-Dublin, like a few pot shots from distance. But once they got over the initial phase of the game and kind of started working the scoreboard, there was an awful lot of what you'd have seen from them in the past. So, I think they're the team that they certainly won't get, above their station based on the performance. But what you're looking for, in the same way that, we say the petulance of the Tyrone team is not a good sign. What you're looking for here is the positives from Dublin and their forward play, the momentum, the way they attacked, their combination play, their way they create space, movement for each other. There were a lot of real positives there, albeit against a very poor team. So they'll be happy. It'll kind of put the league now to bed. And the fact that they were relegated from Division 1, and it's only stronger they'll get. Even the subs that they brought on, were strong. With Paddy Small, still to come back, and a couple others. So they'll have a big say in who wins it eventually.
Do you think they'll win it?
I think, and I'm not being clever about this. I think that Kerry are probably the favourites to win it. I think they're in a really strong position. But let's say if Dublin or Kerry were to meet in the semi-final, very hard to bet against Dublin. They've been there, they've done it consistently. They have, when they go out on any given day, they have multiple All-Ireland medal winners on their team. Vast experience. They know how to win tight games. And yeah, certainly they're not as strong as they were in the past, but they're still probably the team to beat.
Éamonn, were you impressed with Dublin?
I was, Paul. Yeah, I think during the league, when they got relegated, the kind of things that surprised us was the things that they were doing that they've never done, kicking balls into goalies' hands, unforced errors. Work rate wasn't where it normally would be, open at the back, no movement up front. So I think we saw a lot of those issues that are very fixable, especially for a group as talented and as experienced as them, beginning to get sorted out the last day. Johnny Cooper spent a lot of his day sweeping against a Division 4 team. That wasn't a reflection on Wexford. It was more about, testing it for down the road. The Con O'Callaghan up front transforms them. It's as simple as that. And I know it's probably a lot to say one player can make such a difference, but he does, because he's so dynamic, he's so powerful, and he causes panic in the defence that they weren't able to do during the league. And as the game went on the last day, particularly in the second half, he played very well. You could see that he was growing into it. So I agree 100% with Ronan. Of course, they're going to take a huge amount of beating. I think if you're going to win the All-Ireland, you probably have to beat them. And if it shapes up that Kerry end up playing Dublin in an All-Ireland semi-final, obviously if Kerry want to go on and win the All-Ireland, they're going to have to beat Dublin there. And you're really earning your corn by trying to beat Dublin in Croke Park. So I wouldn't be saying they're back. I don't think they were ever gone, but they've certainly tidied themselves up, and they'll be forced to be reckoned with, all right.
Do you think they were doing anything different? Is there anything differently being done differently in their approach to the game, or are they doing what they've done over the last couple of years better?
Yeah, I think that's from what I saw the last night. They looked to be doing their usual game plan, but better. The work rate was definitely up from the league. They had better shape up front. They had better movement. Conor O'Callaghan was central to a lot of that. Johnny Cooper, as we said, was sweeping. They were more urgent as the game went on. They were getting to the tackles. They were forcing turnovers. They were winning a lot of breaking ball. They destroyed Wexford on their own kick out. A lot of the things that we would have associated with that team that won the 6 in a row, they were doing it very well again. They moved away from that very pedestrian, error-ridden stuff that had become kind of a pattern during the league. So I think they spent a week or more in Portugal on a training camp between league and championship. And again, with that quality of players spending a week together like that, they had a chance to iron out a lot of the kinks. They'd never done that in the Jim Gavin era, so it was something new and fresh for them again. So many ways they remind me of where we were in 2013 in my first year in charge, that they're bringing through new players, but there's a lot of experience there as well, with experience of winning. So yeah, they're going to be a big part of the conversation, and it points to an All-Ireland semi-final between Kerry and Dublin, but I think this year so far in the championship has shown us that what we're expecting isn't always the way it's panning out. So we'll see if that's the way it does pan out.
If we take that point, that what we're expecting pans out, the expectation has to be that Kerry will beat Cork next Saturday evening in Park Urin, and the fifth-year students here who I was working with earlier did a survey of 100 students in this school, asking them for results of this match, and 60% of students in the school of the 100 surveyed said that Kerry would win by up to 10 points. 28% said that Kerry would win by between 10 and 15 points. 11% said that Kerry would win by 15 to 20 points. And 1%, and now I'm not great at maths, but 1% of 100 students is one student, and we're going to have a witch hunt to find this student, said that Kerry would lose to Cork next Saturday evening. Ronan.
Did they ask Ronan, Paul, I wonder?
Yeah. Well, you better hold your hand up as a protection for this student. So this makes it really, like, I came down to Kerry yesterday. Every single person who I spoke to yesterday evening cannot see anything other than a comprehensive Kerry victory. Is that how you see it?
Is that me or Éamonn?
No, it's for you.
That's for me. Yeah, look, you have to stand back from it and say that under a kind of any objective analysis, you'd have to say that Kerry are hot favourites to win the game. Now, that said, if I was the manager of the team, we'd be going out to that game, not having conceded before we started. You go out to win the game. But I suppose, look, if you look at it from the point of view of, you play Kerry 10 times, Cork could probably win it once or twice in those 10, but, you'd expect Kerry to win 8, if not 9 of the 10 games at the moment. So, look, I think it's fair enough to say that, Kerry are justified favourites to win the game. That said, I think it'll be a more competitive game than people think it'll be. Like, you go back to the game last year in...
What does competitive mean? How close does it have to be?
I think Cork, if they set up properly and get any foothold in the game, can be within 5 or 6 points of Kerry. I think you go back and look at the game last year, the game in Killarney. I mean, look, we were absolutely hosed on kickouts, our own and theirs. I think Kerry won 75% of all kickouts in the game. And with the forward line that Kerry have, and the quality and the talent, and Kerry are also, look, a great team at playing with the handbrake off. When the game is gone, they will put you to the sword. And Cork, Cork weren't the only team. It happened to Tyrone. It happened to Galway. If you even look at the game against Dublin this year, the league match below, where, if I recall correctly, it was maybe 3 points to 2 or 4 points to 3, 15, 17 minutes into the first half, and Dublin were 14 points down at half time. And again, a highly experienced team, Grand maybe not going that well. So, look, I think Cork can't do as badly as we did last year off kickouts. So I suppose that's the first thing that you would hope that we would win. an adequate amount of possession. And I suppose the second thing then was that if you look at the goal that Kerry got immediately after half-time, you might recall in the game Kerry last year, Brian Hurley actually took a shot that went up into the air. And if you look at it, the ball, I think, landed very near the post. And the two closest players to that were Ian Maguire and Brian Hartnett, our two midfielders. And ball went out over the top, goal below, 8 points down. You know, you're playing against the wind, against the quality side, and look, it went away from us there, you know, very quickly. So I think, look, one of the things is, look, we have to win more possession than we did last year. I think on the law of averages, you know, that's a real outlier of a stat in a game to lose, to only have 25% of all kickouts in the match, number one. And I think number two, look, a big one is, look, we have to keep our not a defensive shape, I don't mean it that way, we have to keep our shape. And when you have, let's say, two midfielders up the pitch like that on the opposition end line, you know, you just can't do that against a quality team. And I think the third thing is that, you know, the performance, we'll say, in the 20 match in Park Keefe and 21, I mean, they were chalk and cheese from the point of view of the way we kept the ball much better. You know, we were almost like a team in Clarny operating against the shot clock, you know, like basketball. We almost seemed to try and get the ball forward and take a shot immediately. And it became a very kind of helter-skelter game, you know, up and down, which was never really going to suit us. So I suppose, based off the fact that, you know, I don't see the kick-out stat. You know, if you go back to Wexford and Dublin last Sunday, like, Wexford literally could not win their own kick-out, and we went through a period of that last year in the match in Killarney. Now, you know, we had an awful lot of work done on our kick-outs, actually, to be honest with you, you know, an awful lot of work done, but, you know, it didn't come off for us in the day at all. And I suppose, based on that, you know, you would think Cork would get a foothold in the game. We have players back. Look, you can see the difference that, let's say, even a Colin, you could see it straight away, the difference, you know, he made. And, you know, that, look, he is like a top quality forward, no question about it. And him alone, you know, will add to us, and obviously we have other players coming back. So, look, I do think Cork will be far more competitive maybe than people think they're going to be. But obviously we've got to go and do it.
I want to read to you something that Dara Ó Cinnéide wrote in the Irish Times last week. He wrote, "In the last few years, Cork footballers have been a disgrace. In the way they've performed, in the way they've stood up for the great history of Cork football, they haven't played for their jersey." Do you recognise that team?
That me again, yeah.
Yeah. I'm afraid so, Ronan.
Yeah.
Do you recognise the team that you managed from that statement?
Well, look, I suppose the first thing I would say is, and okay, again, you know, you try not to be emotional about it. You know, so you see a comment like that, and again, you try and look at it as objectively as you can, and kind of at a distance. So I suppose the first thing I would say is that if you look at Cork's, we'd say, golden period when Billy was the manager, where we won 7 Munster titles in 9 years, right? Which was 1995. So in that period, from 95 to 21, Cork have won 6 Munster championships in 27 years. So, you know, sometimes you wonder, you know, the conversation that we had, the conversation about Cork and where Cork are, you know, in the hierarchy, we'll say, of intercounty football teams, is it deserved? You know, you'd wonder sometimes, is it merited, right? I suppose that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is, look, Dara was a manager of a Kerry under-21 team for 3 years that didn't manage to win a championship game. And I'm sure he wouldn't say about his team that they never went out and gave their effort and everything else. So, I mean, what I would say to you about this group of Cork players is that they, you know, are totally committed to Cork football. There's a huge desire within them to improve. They've had a very, very, you know, Cork football for the last 10 years had kind of very, very up and down, very inconsistent, I suppose, performance. But we've had an awful lot of, you know, maybe turmoil that other counties haven't had. We've had a lot of loss of players. You look at, like, as a manager, the minute you start operating outside, let's say, your 1 to 22, 23, right? When you start going down into player, 24, 25 to 35, right, you're vulnerable, okay? And Cork have been playing for the last number of years without many of their best players. Some of it through injury, some of it through opting out, and whether you like it or not, like I was in Thurles last Sunday for the Cork Clare game. There are at least 7 players on that hurling team stroke panel who are high quality intercounty footballers. So
Is this a huge problem for Cork?
It's a huge problem for Cork, and whether we like it or not.
Do you think football really matters in Cork in general then? Because the manner in which hurling, I was listening to Mark Landers talking the other day about how the Cork hurling supporters had stayed with the team and that they've been very loyal to the hurling team, despite the loss in the league final, despite being hammered in the All-Ireland last year, despite the start against the last one in the first 2 rounds of the championship, and they kept going. But is there the same relationship between the Cork footballers and the Cork public?
I don't think there is, but I mean, look, that was never a big issue for me. There are pockets around the county where football is number one, and that'll remain the case. I suppose the point is that we're always picking from I suppose a reduced pool of players, and that has always been. And go back even to, we'll say, when Cork won the All-Ireland, we'll say Billy was captain in '73. Cork won Munster again in '74, and you look at the way players drifted, dual players there drifted again, towards hurling. And by the way, number one, the hurlers have to do what's best for them. That's life, and players are quite entitled to make a choice about what way they want to go. I think from our point of view, though, I think from a Cork football point of view, it is time to burn the boats, if I could use that phrase. And I suppose, look, the message that we gave to players from my time from 18 on was, if you go, you're not coming back. And I think that message, I think we need to start that now. Let players play up to course mine under 17 and under 20. Let them play, and let them play both. No issue with that whatsoever. But, this kind of toing and froing of players from hurling to football has never really benefited Cork football. And, a very good example of that is, you take Aidan Walsh, like two-time All-Star, in football, and drifts off playing hurling, and really ended up playing neither. You have, let's say, a guy like Mark Keane, for example, at the moment, so is not playing football, but is playing very little hurling now as well, So we've never really benefited from that or dual code. And so Cork hurling has to do what's best for Cork hurling, no issue with that whatsoever. And if a player wishes to make a decision about what direction they want to go, perfect. But you're not coming back. And I think until we make that decision, we're going to struggle a bit. But coming back to a very long-winded answer to your question about Dara, and Dara's comment, listen, objectively, obviously we've underperformed massively for a long number of years now. But, what I would say, knowing the group there, they're a very honest, committed group, they want to do well. And, I suppose progress is never linear. It's never just, you go the next step, progress. There are setbacks along the way. And we played quite well after. Look, obviously we got a trimming in 18 when Éamonn was the manager in the park. We played quite well in the match in 19. We're very competitive in the Super 8s. Obviously beat Kerry in 20. And look, yeah, a big setback last year. But I think if we keep our nerve and keep bringing players through, keep working the direction, keep doing the right things, it'll come right.
Dara, your old teammate for both club and county, he did something very interesting in writing that, because Kerry people have a reputation of being kind of quite guarded in their comments about their own capacities, and at the same time building up everybody else, and never done saying, it's going to be really hard against Cork this weekend. Mm-hmm. But he's come straight out. Is that what Kerry people in general think about Cork football?
That's the way Dara played football as well. He came straight out with most things. That's his opinion, and I suppose.
But is it widespread in Kerry?
Being honest, Kerry people expect to win, on Saturday. I don't know, is that the reason for, there's a kind of a reduced interest in this game. You know, I would have thought because there was 11,000 tickets going that there would be a mad scramble for tickets. County Board divvied out 25 to each club and stuff like that, and I'm not so sure that there's been a huge uptake. I think it's just the unfamiliarity of Park.
Are they being sent back? Are the tickets going back?
I'm not sure. You know, the deadline was today, so I wouldn't have up-to-date information, but as of yesterday evening and this morning around our club, it was slow enough, but I think it's just a hassle. Saturday evening, excuse after excuse after excuse, and you know there's a lot of stuff going on in people's lives, and I'm sure they're saying, listen, it's not the Kerry attitude, we'll wait for the final or whatever, but Cork aren't being overlooked. This is the part where the two Kerry people in the stand look into the distance and start scratching their heads, look at the tea leaves, weather forecasts and all that, and say Cork have a chance. But as Ronan says, you have to be true to the evidence in front of you as well. Kerry are playing at a higher level the last number of years. We're still scratching our heads as to how Cork beat us 2 years ago down in Páirc Uí Chaoimh.
Could you see that happening that way?
Didn't see it coming. No, didn't see it coming like most Kerry people, I think. But after 5 minutes, you knew it was going to happen, not nearly. Just the hunger that Cork showed on every breaking ball, right through to the last minute. Ty Corkery from Kilnamartyr went as a sub, came on the field. He's not a big lad. Went down on the ball, horse body, Clifford out of it, won the ball. I think actually was involved in the movement that led to Mark Keane's goal. And that epitomised Cork's attitude on the day. And that kind of hunger and attitude will carry you so far in certain conditions. Kerry probably have learned an awful lot from that and are using that in the background psychologically all the time. Say it can happen, it does happen. Ronan referenced the 7 Munster titles that Cork would have won in a very strong period for them. I played a number of those years, and we were on the other side of the fence. And the last thing we would have wanted was a Billy Morgan or an ex-Cork footballer coming out saying these things. I noted with interest the hurling manager, Kieran Kingston, last week saying that what was said in public actually seeped through to the players. It does. They're all human. And they are all doing their best, and they are all trying hard. And I'm not being patronising or condescending here. It's not nice to be reading stuff like that. But Dara is asked for his opinion. He gives an honest opinion. And, you know, I think it is prevalent in Kerry. That opinion is prevalent in Kerry. Not so much a disgrace. I think there was disappointment from the Kerry point of view that Cork were using, you know, planting a flag and using this as their, you know, as their rallying call. Because Kerry didn't really have an interest in this. Kerry just wanted to play a game and to try and get through that game. And that's the main thing from a Kerry.
Jack O'Connor was saying yesterday that it was going to Páirc Uí Chaoimh was going into the Lions' den. Do you see it like that?
No. It's an away game. Páirc Uí Chaoimh is a fine football pitch, the exact same dimensions as Páirc Uí Chaoimh, which is an even better setting. Páirc Uí Chaoimh, I think if you're a player in the Kerry dressing room next Saturday at 5:30, 6:15, you're actually looking forward to it. You're hoping the stands are full. You're hoping the atmosphere is hostile. You're hoping that you're tested. You're hoping your credentials are tested all the way down along the line. And it can happen. You know, and thankfully in 2022, from a Kerry point of view, that 2020 thing is there as a bludgeon to beat them over the head with all the time and say, listen, this happened as recently as 2 years ago to the same two groups of footballers. You know, I'm sure it's the same in Leinster. I actually think Kildare are going to rattle Dublin and Leinster. I think they could beat them this year in Leinster. And it can happen. And when it happens, then we're wondering why we didn't see it happening. As Kerry people, we didn't see it 2 years ago. I have to say, but after 5 minutes, actually in the warm-up, your warm-up was even more intense than the Kerry one that day. And I said, this could be a type of a day we're in trouble. Then you start missing 21-yard frees. Then you start trying, from a Kerry point of view, trying to take shots that aren't on. And you say, it's happening, it's happening. And then the opposition start growing into the game and say, these lads aren't half as good as they're cracked up to be all of a sudden. I don't see it happening on Saturday, realistically, based on the evidence up to now, especially in the last 12 months. The one thing I would say about the Cork team, their last game against Offaly, for example, they're that kind of a patchy team. I think they're about 2 years away from finding themselves as a team, you know. They rush into a big lead against Offaly, and then when they have to finish out the game, they do that. So they are capable of it, but it's the consistency over and over again that they haven't found. Beating Kerry 2 years ago, coming out that day, I said I had a feeling that Tipperary could actually catch them in the final, because replicating that hunger again and again and again doesn't, you know, it's hard when you're an up-and-coming team, you're trying to establish yourself as a team. But as for Saturday's game, I think the pupils here are fairly on the money. You know, the majority of the pupils. Do you mean the up to 10 points ones or the 15 to 20 points? The up to 10 points ones. Yeah, I think Ronan saying, you know, what's a reasonable performance from a Cork point of view, and it's awful to be listening to an ex-Kerry footballer saying this, like here, you know, but.
6 points. Kerry, you say 6 points?
6, 7, 8 points. Kerry are a better team than if they play, and if they're allowed play. But that's the beauty of sport. It can happen.
You said something very, very interesting there at the start of that, though, and I would question it. You said at the beginning that Kerry learned from the game against Cork. Well, the signs of last summer was when it came down to the push against Tyrone, they hadn't learned from it.
Well, that's the big question. That's the only question I think this Kerry group have to answer. We all know how good they are when they get on top of you, when they get a run on you. But coming down the stretch in a tight game, the decision making,
and going for goals and not keeping the scoreboard.
I wouldn't draw a straight line between Cork 2020 and Tyrone 2021. I think it was two. But yeah, you could say that the decision making in the key moments wasn't there. You know, I would treat the Cork game 2020 in Páirc Uí Chaoimh in isolation as an unbelievably well plotted ambush. You know, it was really well played out, and Kerry played into it. Then, like, you know, it was a type of day that. You know, we've all had them where you're the underdog and you love being part of this thing that is happening right in front of your eyes. 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes. You're at half time. You're still in the game. You're still there. Halfway through the second half, it's still a game. Whereas the Tyrone game was always going to be fraught with danger for Kerry. Always was. Tyrone played Kerry in Killarney as recently as a couple of weeks ago in a league game that ostensibly didn't mean a whole lot to Kerry, but they wanted to win it. And Tyrone had it sussed. And you know, that's why that concern will always be there with teams like Cork, who can catch you on a day, 2 days out of 10, as Ronan said, possibly, and Tyrone, who can catch you 50-50 any day of the week. And that's those two losses,
though, those two losses to Cork and Tyrone, albeit that they were different. Is it because of those losses? Is that why you wanted to get involved in managing the Kerry team this year?
I think anybody who's interested in football would want to get involved in management. This man got involved at a very early age. I kind of showed an interest a little later. I said, get off the fence, stop talking on podcasts and writing in papers and presenting TV programmes and actually do something about it, you know. And there was wonderful people involved in our group, like Seamus Moynihan, Donny Buck, all these lads that were, you know, really committed. I think every Kerry person, ex-managers, ex-players, wants this group of Kerry players to get over the line, because nothing sickens me more than listening to ex-players. We offer our opinion on games. We have no influence over it, absolutely zero. The only people that can influence it, even these lads have walked the line, you know, under pressure, but they'll reach a stage in a game where they realise, okay, players, it's up to you, you know, and that's the beauty of being in your 20s and in your early 30s where you can still play. For me, Kerry football is all about, right now, is Tom O'Sullivan going to get an All-Ireland medal? Is Brian O'Begley going to get an All-Ireland medal? You know, that's, as an ex-player, that's what I wish in them. And there'll be nobody happier than the ex-players in that regard. I think they're good enough to do it. I think they've put in enough to get there, but you can't just press fast forward and get us to an All-Ireland final in July. They have to take the stages, and thankfully they got that lesson from 2 years ago.
Would you get involved with managing another county?
Never.
Asking for a friend?
Never. No, I couldn't. It's not the same thing. I couldn't even get involved with another club. You know, it's...
Why?
It's football.
Would you manage Dingle?
No, I wouldn't. And I've plenty of respect for Dingle.
Have you ever been asked to manage Dingle?
Oh God, I'd be the last person in the world they'd ask. But the issue is the football. You know, at its basic core is tribal. You know, and that's what I always liked about it. You know, some of the best battles you'll have are on the field with a Dingle, Kerry playing Cork. That tribalism has to be there. The day that goes away, we're in trouble in the GA. The day that disappears. And then it's very important afterwards to go off and have a drink with them or whatever, you know. But I think that animosity has to be there. That edge has to be there. Whether it's perceived or imagined or otherwise, it has to be there. That animosity between local clubs, local rivalries, two counties across the county, but that has to be there. So for that reason alone, and it always surprised me, you know, I'd say Paddy O'Shea, who was brilliant on playing those strings within a Kerry setup, was so successful when he went to Westmeath, because he obviously transferred some of those skills into the Westmeath dressing room. But I would imagine that, you know, he gave so much of himself to Kerry, and the tribal element of his input to the game of football was what made him the great manager that I thought he was. And, you know, I am always fascinated by these lads that hop from club to club or from county to county. I think it's just, I always kind of wonder, what motivates you? How do you actually plan a training session around that? How do you actually plan to get a group of players to be tribal for an hour and a half against somebody?
How do you say we?
Yeah,
you know, if you're from a different place.
Yeah, you know, it's changing. I'm not naive enough to know that the landscape is changing in football and has been for 30 years. And there are very successful imports within counties and so on. But to me, it's not the same thing, and it's just diminished maybe 1% or something. It's not the full experience when it's not tribal.
Did you ever mark Dara, Éamonn, in club football?
No, I'd say we came across each other a couple of times, but we stayed away from each other. Dara would have been inside, and I would have been maybe centre back. We played Gaeltacht twice with Field Rangers, but we weren't marking each other. No, would have marked each other in training plenty of times, but not in competitive games. No.
And could you go outside and manage a different county?
No, I couldn't for the reasons that Dara outlined there as well. And I just couldn't imagine managing against Kerry. I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't imagine it. And I think, as Dara articulated very well there, that part of what makes you as a player or as a manager or as a supporter is that feeling you have in your stomach for your own place, and it would be different. So no, that'd be firm no.
And in the context of next weekend, can you make a plausible case for Cork winning?
I can make a case for Cork competing, but I just think there's a lot going against them at the moment. There's been a lot of flux within their group. Keith Ricken having to step back at the moment, and we wish him all the best, isn't ideal. They have injuries to key players, the likes of Ian Maguire, Powter, Meehan, big players for them. I would imagine leaders within the group as well. So it is going to be very hard for them to beat Kerry next weekend. I think Kerry are on a mission. Jack is in year one of his latest term, and he's very determined, I'm sure, to continue where they left off in the league. I imagine that Cork are going to set up quite defensively, which will suit Kerry. I think until Kerry play a team that play with 6 scoring forwards and ask Tadhg Morley to mark someone, they're going to be fine. I think that's the day that the question marks will be raised, then, that when you're playing a team that play with 6 up, that's going to be the test for Kerry. But like in the short term, I think that Cork will I expect them to bring a lot. We always, when I was involved either as a player or as a manager, whether it was Cork or Clare, Limerick or Tipperary, we always treated them with the utmost respect. And I think even if you were sure you'd win, a thing that you could guarantee within the group is that if you don't do your job as an individual, there's someone else going to take your spot. And you can boil it down to as basic as that from the Kerry point of view. They're in a good place, they have a strong squad. If you're getting a starting 15 jersey, well, you don't want to mess up and make sure and give a chance for some other fella to get in and take it off you. So I expect Kerry to win. I think Cork will really come at them hard early on. They'll try and keep it tight. But I was shocked. I remember the moment in 2020. I was watching it at home when Mark Keane got the goal, and I was stuck to the chair after it, and it was a genuine shock. And I couldn't move, or I couldn't comprehend it for 10 or 15 minutes. But I'll be even more shocked if the same thing happens this weekend.
I was in a room full of Dubs when that happened. The reaction was as if they were from Blarney. They were somewhat ecstatic at the prospect. And that rivalry between Dublin and Kerry, is this the year that Kerry turned the tables? You talked about, Dara mentioned the hunger and wanting to see Thomas Sullivan with an All-Ireland medal and wanting to see the Cliffords with All-Ireland medals. But how much hunger is too much hunger? Can it become a burden that this is there and hasn't been achieved?
It possibly can, and there's probably a balance in that. That Kerry group, they're at a good age now. They're at a good stage in their development. They have a lot of experience under their belt. They've had those tough couple of defeats that it does sharpen the edge and the focus until they get through those kind of games. Of course, they're going to have questions over themselves, privately, that we have to get through this. But they will get through it. I have every faith that they will get through it. And if it isn't this year, it'll be next year. The group is there. It's whether it'll be Dublin or not. The game that I'd be most worried about for Kerry, obviously you have to take into account that they have to get through the Munster Championship. I expect them to get through the Munster Championship. But they have 4 weeks in All-Ireland quarter-final then. And you're coming in against a team, if you get a Tyrone or a Mayo or an Armagh or whoever is coming through that, and they have a couple of wins under their belt and they're coming full steam ahead into Croke Park in All-Ireland quarter-final weekend. Kerry haven't had a game in 4 weeks. They've beaten, the likes of a Limerick or Tipperary in the Munster final. It's not ideal preparation. So I see that as a game fraught with danger if the thing pans out as we kind of expect it to pan out over the next couple of weeks. But if it gets to All-Ireland semi-final, Kerry Dublin, that is an appetising prospect, all right.
The last weekend, Limerick beat Clare in the first ever penalty shootout in knockout Gaelic games. Do you see Limerick emerging here and displacing Cork as the long-term challenge to Kerry dominance in Munster?
No, I think Cork will always be there. To be honest, I think they've won an under-20 All-Ireland, they've won minor All-Ireland, they have had success underage. Ronan mentioned it about losing players to the hurlers. That's probably a challenge for Cork. But no, I think Cork will always, when they have their house in order, when they have everyone there together, they're going to be a threat. But I do think that Limerick are on the up, and they've got a lot of everything in the background right in terms of their academies, in terms of their underage development, their S&C. You can see the size of their players now. They're so, they're like a second a Limerick hurling team in many ways, the way they tag off now. So they're on the up and they're going to be a factor. But I don't see any problem with having 3, if not 4 teams competing for provincial championships, if there still is provincial championships.
Ronan, I wanted to ask you, you finished up as Cork manager last year. Did the players want you to stay?
Well, look, I suppose what any manager does, and look, Jim Gavin has said this himself, that look, you would always, you never assume that you continue on with the group. So look, what you do there is, you take your soundings from your leadership group, and look, I was happy to stay on, as I understand it. The players were happy for me to continue, but look, there are three parties involved in that decision, and unless all 3 are unanimous, then it doesn't work. So look, I was quite open. I was happy to continue with the group, because I suppose I believe in the group and the group of players. And I felt, that they could respond from, and come back from the match in Clarny last year. But ultimately, as I say, the 3 parties have to be in agreement, and the executive of the board, weren't going to support me going forward, and you have to hold up your hand and accept that. They're entitled to make that decision.
Do you think that the COVID suspension had played into it?
If it did, I'm not aware of it.
Yeah.
If it did, as I say, if it was a factor, I'm not aware of that.
So in reading up on before you come in here today, I went back through the story of that suspension and what happened in it for the All Beach in the start of January, and I came to with the help of students as well here, the 10th of April 2021, the DRA, the Disputes Resolution Authority, upheld the decision. There's a bit of an alphabet soup of committees here. So there's the CHC, which is a Central Hearings Committee, and the CAC, which is the Appeals Committee, and they upheld the decision. Although in their statement they said that the Central Hearings Committee had erred because they didn't give you the reasons for the imposition of a penalty in excess of the minimum shutdown rule. So I'm not too sure how you can uphold a decision which then you say you haven't given the person reasons for it. But anyway, they did that, and then they said that this statement is for information purposes only. The tribunal's full written decision will be communicated to the parties and published on the DRA website in due course. Now, I looked at that website this morning, and it still hasn't been published a year on. Have you received those reasons yourself?
Yes.
You were given them, but they never published them?
No.
And the CHC and the CAC, do you think you got a due process through that system?
Look, I think you have to look. The process is there. I went through it from beginning to end. You have to accept the outcome of it. Certainly, any DRA decision, I suppose what I'd say is, it's a very interesting process actually to be involved in. And, you'd need an hour actually to kind of go through it in detail. you've said there, one alphabet soup of committees, like, there's hearings committees, appeals committees, DRA. Each of those, there are written submissions into them. The meetings, which were on Zoom at the time, each meeting was, I'd say, 3 hours in length. I said the DRA one could have been 4 or 5. And you get a real understanding of, I suppose, the mechanisms of, the discipline, how the GA deals with discipline issues and the process you go through. I mean, look, what I would say is certainly, a DRA decision is an objective one, and I don't have any qualms about saying that. The earlier part of the process, they're not perfect.
That feels like a very kind way of putting it.
Yeah, look, I suppose it's a kind of thing, look, that you'd have to, you'd actually have to sit down with someone and go through it in detail. It is very complicated. Even the makeup of the committees is quite complicated. Then the makeup of the committees change in the middle of the process. But what I would say is anybody who's been involved in the DRA process, the outcome of that process is objective. And if you put your name forward as part of that, then you accept the outcome and their decision.
Okay, I'm going to throw it open to the students here in 1 second for a question. But before I do that, I want to ask you: do you think Kerry will win the All Ireland?
If they don't play Dublin on the way, and I'm not being clever here, I think if Kerry and Dublin play each other in a semi-final, which they're due to
play, they're due to meet in the semi-final.
And if Dublin beat Kerry, I'm not even sure. Yeah, or Kildare. I'm not even sure Dublin. I'm not even saying Dublin will win it, but I do think that.
Do you think Dublin will beat Kerry in an All-Ireland semi-final?
I think they could beat them. Is what I would say. And I think the other thing here is that you're talking about, minute details here making a difference. So for example, Dublin are a different team with Conor Callan, right? You look at Kerry last year, where they lost, we'll say, David Clifford, a once-in-a-generation player. They lost him for just extra time of a game, and people would have felt that had a huge impact. So I hope it doesn't come down to an injury. I go back to an equivalent example. For example, is Cork Limerick hurling semi-final in 2018, right? I mean, I'm quite confident in saying that if Alan Cadigan had been fit for that game, I think Cork would be All-Ireland champions that year. Would have been All-Ireland champions that year. It comes down to that. They didn't even have him to bring him on in the extra time. He was going really well. He was one of the top forwards in the country. Even if you were springing him off a bench there in that game against Limerick, I think Cork would have got over the line that day. But they didn't, and that's life, right? And now you see where Limerick
are gone to, yeah.
So, look, I think it comes down to really, really minute details. I've spoken before. I still think the 16 semi-final when Éamonn was the manager, still the greatest game of football I've ever been at, where, tactically and every other way, both teams carried through everything they had at them. I mean, there's a way of losing, and I thought the way Kerry played that day in that match, I thought they were a credit to him and the backroom team. But the thing about Dublin was, Dublin were the only team that would have come out of that game and won it. Kerry would have beaten every other team in the country with the performance they gave that day in 16, but they didn't beat Dublin. And that's why I think Dublin are the one team that, when Kerry at the top of their game, throwing everything and the kitchen sink, Dublin are probably the one team that could still manage to beat them.
Dara?
Yeah, there's a tide in the affairs of men, as they say, and I think the time is right. I think we had the same feeling 25 years ago, 97, without wanting to heap too much pressure on Jack and his troop or his players. I think the time is now. Éamonn speaks about it might happen. I think there'll never be a better chance than this year.
And do you see progression in the team, what progression is there?
Absolutely. I mentioned my own clubman, Brianna Begley. He's come on a ton this year. And
in training with Kerry.
Yeah, he's been he was in under Éamonn's time. He's
yes.
a minor in 14, so that would make him, at the end of this year, he'll be 26.
So what's he doing differently?
He's just defending smarter and going when picking his time to go a bit better. And it's down
And
to,
who's doing that work with him?
I would imagine that's Jack O'Connor, Paddy Talley, these lads. You know, Diarmuid Murphy's a very smart man, York, these lads, you know, and again, it's a time, the man is going to be, you know, he's 25, 26. Jeez, you'd love to be that age again, you know, and he's probably at a stage now, he's good enough. He's stuck with it for 7 or 8 years. Tom Sullivan the same way, you know. They've had their kickbacks, their setbacks, their disappointments, and they've stored it and they've brought it along. And that's just 2 players locally here. I'm sure all over the county the players are feeling the same thing, and they've got this thing where Clifford has brought his game to another level. You know, Sean Shea is going to be coming back into the mix, like, and yeah, the concerns have been there about who's our goalie, what's our best midfield partnership, can we finish out tight games, all those questions. They're brilliant from a player's point of view because you tick them off one by one. If you do it once, you'll do it again and again and again. I think they're in a great position. I think it'll take a hell of a team to beat them this year.
You seem to say that Kildare will beat Dublin in the Leinster Football Championship. Why do you think
Kildare again are in a very good place? I know Glenn Ryan, the famous interview after being, you know, relegated to Division 2. I think that's capital for players. Like, you can talk to the players and say, listen, we're not that far off. They played some really decent football.
Yeah.
They didn't play that well away from home. I think last year, I have never spoken to Jack O'Connor about this, but I thought there was more in them in the Leinster final last year. I think they overestimated Dublin. And it's only afterwards they might have some nagging regret about the way they approached that game. And they're coming into Croke Park again soon enough in the Leinster semi-final. Tricky game for them was the last one, the Louth game with a bit of momentum. They showed what they're about there. Those are the type, they should have been beaten Louth, but the way they dismantled them and the way they absolutely hammered them, I'm saying to myself, this is a hungry, edgy bunch of players that can go a bit of a distance, and the next obvious target for them is a Leinster title, and that's huge. It wouldn't be as big for Dublin. It's about time somebody took Dublin and Leinster, and I think it could be this year.
I would question though whether those really talented Kildare forwards, and they have some work as hard as say the talented Dublin forwards on the same time, and I wonder whether that won't catch them in Croke Park.
I wouldn't say so. I think they'll measure it and they'll calibrate it by last year's performance and say where are the improvements here. We're after a good season in Division 1, which has really opened their eyes to where their weaknesses are. So I think they're going to have a right rattle off Dublin this year.
Yeah, do you see it like that, Éamonn? It could be a Dublin-Kerry All-Ireland quarter-final and the winner plays Kildare in the All-Ireland semi-final.
Quite possibly. Paul, nothing had surprised me the way the season is going, but look, I do...
It's Kerry though for you, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it is. I think that they've been building well over the last couple of years with the couple of setbacks, and the players that are there, everything's in place. So I'd be hopeful that Kerry will be the first July All-Ireland champions. I'm open to correction in that now. You'll probably tell me there was something
I wish I could. I should have checked that out before it came. I'm not too sure. Does anyone have a question for us out on the floor? Don't be shy. Here we go.
Anthony.
A question for Ronan. Why did you appeal the ban?
Very simply because I thought it was wrong, and I suppose to this day I'm still waiting for someone to tell me what COVID rule that we broke.
Thanks.
Yeah, in that context though, isn't that right? Like, if the complexity isn't just in the process, it's the complexity is on what you're supposed to have done, and that was never clear, and yet it's put in, and then the Cork County Board Secretary wrote in the report at the end of the year that it shouldn't have happened, but it's never really been set out why.
How long do you have? Yeah, look, it's like the penalty was for breaching the training, the close season. Now, if you look at the last 10, 15 years, there isn't one, you know, and but look, ultimately to answer the question, I think what was important was the amount of, we had come through, obviously the first in 2020, we'd come through the championship that year when it had recommenced, obviously the end of the league and the championship, and teams had, you know, and our medical team, like every other medical team, had put such effort into making sure that players and families and everybody else were safe. And the amount of effort that was to put into, for example, that Camp in Youghal was immense to make sure that everybody was safe and that we were compliant, which we were, and hence the appeal.
Okay. Míle buíochas le Larry Ryan as an bud créile seo a rith, le Raf Rocca, le Owen Barry, le Andrew Farrell, le Tony Lean, agus gach aine san Examiner Sport. Kamala sin míle buíochas le Ronan McCarthy, le Dara Ó Cinnéide, le Éamonn McMurrish, agus gandát gach aine an seo sa Pobalscoil. Gomór war grúpa bliana cuaig a cairilum maidin. Béimiid Hernash go luath.
A grain of rice. A grain of rice is going to tip the scale. Just remember that, lad.
There's a small bit of a needle there.
Come on, Mayo, you've got to get Andy Moran into the game.
Lift